lived in a beautiful neighborhood of Brentwood, California. And sadly, as first responders reached the scene, I was the one Rob chose to confide in during his final days. And I didn't fully understand how desperate he truly was. Those words were spoken by Billy Crystal, echoing through the quiet funeral of Rob Reiner inside a small chapel in Brentwood. There were no cameras, no prepared speeches, only white flowers, flickering candlelight, and the people who had truly stepped into his life. And in a moment that seemed destined for silence, Billy Crystal's confession froze the entire room. He revealed that Rob's final conversations were not centered on himself. They revolved around his son, a long-standing obsession, a fractured relationship, and the helplessness of a father who had navigated an entire lifetime in Hollywood, yet could not find a way out within his own family. In that moment, it became clear this was not a farewell, but a belated admission of pain carried in silence, of warning signs that were overlooked, and of a friendship forced to live on with a regret that would never fade. And before we move deeper into this story, if Rob Reiner was ever a part of your memories, leave behind a heart as a quiet tribute to him. The man who had spent his entire life making others smile now stood face to face with his own grief. Billy raised the microphone closer, drew in a slow breath, and finally spoke. I hate having to do this, because if I'm standing here, it means Rob is really gone. Billy Crystal spoke very softly. He did not strain his voice, nor did he try to provoke emotion. Yet the moment he began, the room fell utterly still. No one moved. There was no coughing, no whispering. Everyone simply sat there, as if they all understood they were hearing something that must not be missed. Billy paused for exactly one beat, very brief. He looked down at the floor, then lifted his gaze, as if searching for something to steady himself in the overwhelming quiet of the room. According to Billy, Rob Reiner had never been a loud person. He didn't enter a room to command attention. Rob simply was, present enough to make others feel safe, quiet enough to never make anyone feel pressured. Billy said that if you ever needed Rob, you wouldn't have to look for him. You just had to know. Rob had very small habits, ones that almost never changed. He called at exactly the right time. Never early, never a minute late. If the appointment was at 8 o'clock, the phone would ring precisely then. And after every show, every time Billy appeared in public, Rob would always send a short message. Just a few words, no explanation needed, but enough for Billy to know that Rob had watched and that he was still there. And before saying anything related to work, Rob always asked one single question. Are you okay? Billy lowered his head when he mentioned this. He said it was never a polite, routine question. Rob genuinely waited for the answer. If Billy stayed silent, Rob would not continue. If Billy said he wasn't okay, Rob would not rush to offer advice. Billy said that throughout his life, there had been no shortage of people who wanted to pull him out of sadness. They advised him, urged him on, told him he had to be stronger, that he had to move forward. But Rob was different. Rob never tried to erase that sadness. As Billy spoke of this, he swallowed softly. The microphone in his hand trembled slightly. Rob didn't try to save him from pain. Rob simply stayed there, sat beside him long enough for Billy to be able to breathe again in his own way. After that sentence, the room sank into a thick, heavy silence. No one reacted. No one looked down. Everyone understood that this was no longer a speech. This was something spoken from a very deep, very private place, something that had never been prepared to be said before a crowd. Billy turned slightly toward the row of seats where the family sat. He didn't look directly at anyone, but his voice slowed, softened. According to Billy, Rob had never stood alone. Behind him, there was always his family. There was always Michelle, the place Rob returned to after long days. where laughter no longer needed to be loud. Billy didn't say much. He left behind just one sentence, brief and complete in itself. If Rob was the laughter the world heard, then Michelle was the place where that laughter came to rest. Billy bowed his head gently toward the family, like a word of thanks, like an acknowledgement. Then he turned back to face the room. At that moment, his voice dropped noticeably. There were no more stories, no more recollections, only the one thing he had tried to avoid from the very beginning, but could no longer keep at bay. According to Billy, he still had one message from Rob. A very short message. Rob sent it, and Billy thought he would reply later. He also still had an appointment with Rob. Nothing important, just a meal. The two of them had said they'd do it next week. And there was one very simple sentence Billy had intended to say, but he told himself another time. Billy lifted his head as he reached this point. He didn't look at anyone in the room. He stared straight into the empty space ahead, as if Rob were standing there, listening to him. I thought we still had time. Then Billy continued, very softly, as if speaking to himself. I let later steal the last time. Billy stopped. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if trying to keep his voice from breaking in front of everyone. The room remained silent, not because anyone signaled it, but because no one knew what else to do. In that moment, Billy's pain no longer stood alone. It was there, in the middle of the room, and everyone could feel it, without a single word being spoken. And it was precisely then that Billy understood there was a part of the story he had avoided from the start, but could no longer stay silent about. Billy remained standing. He did not rush to speak again, as if weighing whether what he was about to say should be said in that room at all. When he opened his eyes, his voice was lower than before, slower, and entirely different. There is one thing, Billy said, that Rob told me, not for anyone else to hear, but today I think I need to say it out loud, not to judge, just so people can understand what kind of person he was. Billy said that Rob was never the type to complain. He hated turning private matters into a burden for others. If he could endure something in silence, Rob would choose silence. But there were nights, very late ones, when Rob would call Billy, not to vent, not to ask for advice right away. Sometimes, on the other end of the line, there was only a long stretch of silence, as if Rob were asking himself whether he should speak at all. Then Rob began asking Billy questions that felt strange. They had nothing to do with movies, nothing to do with work. He asked about being a father, about the feeling of watching your child change and not knowing what to hold on to in order to keep them close. Once, Rob asked him directly, "What is a father supposed to do when he feels his child is slowly slipping out of reach?" According to Billy, that was when Rob was talking about Nick Reiner, his son. For many years, Nick had struggled with addiction, a long battle the family had tried to get through again and again. Nick had been in rehabilitation 17 times, yet not once could it truly be called a success. But to Rob, the number no longer mattered. What mattered was that not once had he ever dared to believe it would truly be the last time. Billy did not go into detail. He only said that Rob had witnessed too many almost moments, almost peace, almost stability, to understand that the most painful thing was not relapse itself, but the helplessness of a father who could not suffer in place of his child. Each time things failed to hold, Rob returned to the same question. What had he missed? Where had he not done enough? In the way Billy told it, Rob did not speak with blame in his voice. He spoke like a father afraid of making one more mistake, afraid of saying too much, afraid of staying silent for too long, afraid that any choice at all might push his child even farther away. And it was during those calls that Billy understood